Otaku Killer, featuring Tsutomu Miyazaki. That is his full name. Crimes and sprees. Tsutomu was known to murder at least four known young girls that were aged between 4 to 7 years old. The crime sprees would take place between August of 1988 to June of 1989 in Tokyo and Saitama, Japan. Before Tsutomu would murder, or before he would even meet his victims, he would at first look for his victims. He would specifically target girls that were alone or playing alone at the parks or streets, seemingly without their parents or legal guardian. Tsutomu Miyazaki would use the chance to lure the little girls into his car. Once they got inside his car, he would strangle them until they would lose their consciousness. He tragically did not end with murdering their lives. He would engage in necrophilia, similar to the case of Jeffrey Dahmer, where he would engage in necrophilia with his young male victims. In fact, other than necrophiliac, once again similar to Jeffrey Dahmer, he would engage in cannibalism with their bodies. With the remaining parts of their bodies, Tsutomu Miyazaki would use their bodies' parts as trophies or even the bodies itself. Other than murders, he would taunt the victims' families with phone calls along with psychologically torture methods to their families. Investigation. The investigation for the Japanese serial killer, Tsutomu Miyazaki, was characterized by systemic failures along with intense frustration within the police department of Tokyo and a massive manhunt. Also similar to the case of Jose Antonio Rodriguez Vega, the police did not know at first whether the missing girls case was a serial killer case or not. The police would at first dismiss the missing cases as standard disappearances or localized abduction. In addition, due to the well-hidden corpses, the police would not be able to find the bodies of the victims. In the while of the confusing case, Tsutomu Miyazaki himself would taunt the victims' families. Not only the families he would taunt, he would also claim as the responsibility for the serial killer to the news station. One day, on July 23rd, 1989, years after the case went cold, well, actually not that long later, the police was called into the park. It involved the police specifically because a father reported a man taking photos of his daughters when she was nude. The father would attack Tsutomu Miyazaki, attempting to catch and stop him from taking the photos. However, he would escape and foolishly leave his car behind. Moments later, Tsutomu Miyazaki had thought the police had left by then, leading to him coming back into the park, as an attempt to retrieve his vehicle back. However, he was arrested due to the fact both the father and the police awaited in the scene. Investigation Part 2. After the arrest, the police would forcefully search inside the apartment of Tsutomu Miyazaki. In other words, the police raided his flat, leading to discovering horrifyingly disturbing photos on the walls. When the police got to the place, they discovered, specifically disturbingly, at least more than 5,000 photos of nude girls, anime girls, and even photos of his victims. It was noted in a cardboard box the police would discover videotapes of his victims before their deaths, along with child pornography. In other words, the investigation in this house led to the police gaining evidence for the court later on trials and proceedings. Speaking of evidence, due to the overwhelming amount of evidence found in his flat, Tsutomu Miyazaki felt a sense of pressure, which led him to confessing the murders, along with the specific dates and time on when he discovered and murdered his victims. Upon his confessions, he would also lead the police to where he dumped the bodies of his victims. The setting he led to the police was at a mountain, forest, and somewhat actually near the parks he would find his victims in. Trial and court proceedings. The trial and court proceedings for the case of Tsutomu Miyazaki was considered one of the most intense, expensive, and long battles in Japanese history. Throughout the trial, Tsutomu Miyazaki showed no remorse towards his murderers. Matter of fact, he would detach himself from the murders and would even claim he was not responsible for the murders. Specifically, Tsutomu would claim a character named Ratman, or a giant animal, had forced him to commit the murders. In several occasions, he would even draw what the Ratman looked like. The court would first order Tsutomu Miyazaki to participate in psychiatric evaluations. The result, though, would prove that Tsutomu Miyazaki had suffered from severe mental disorders and personality disorders. And in addition, in other evaluations, it had proven he suffered from schizophrenia. Despite the evaluations and medical conditions, the court declared and proved Tsutomu Miyazaki he knew what was right and from wrong. Ultimately, the judge would also sentence Tsutomu Miyazaki to death by hanging, in addition being guilty for all 4 counts of murder and mutilation of the corpses. Childhood. The childhood of Tsutomu Miyazaki was characterized by severe bullying and isolation from peers. Tsutomu Miyazaki would have this medical condition where his wrists would be fused together, meaning he could not have the power to raise his wrists even above his shoulders. In addition, he cannot tilt his palms to the other side. This condition led to Tsutomu Miyazaki being bullied at school very often, even targeted by every student in the class. Reportedly, he had no friends or peers he could hang out with. Everyone seemed to have thought he was a weird student. Aside from school life, in home life, Tsutomu was heavily isolated and neglected by his parents. His father specifically would barely speak to him or even eye contact as much, while his mother did not even have the time to hang out or talk to Tsutomu Miyazaki. He reportedly had 2 sisters who he did not get along with, isolated from his family in a way. Despite the neglect, his parents would pressure Tsutomu to do well and meet their high standards. However, when his grades began to slip, his father would reportedly mock him, and with cruelty, he would taunt Tsutomu Miyazaki. Childhood Part 2. Tsutomu Miyazaki did not get along with his family. However, he would have this strong attachment to his grandfather. In a way, his grandfather gave him the only emotional support and love to Tsutomu. He would heavily emotionally anchor to his father throughout his childhood. However, later on, his grandfather would tragically pass away. There was a time when he was young where he had an obsession with gore along with horror slasher films. He would watch the films, try to forget about the rejection he suffered as a boy from his parents along with the students in his class. In other words, he created his own fantasy-like world. By his late teens, he began to have dark fantasies towards pornography along with hatred towards society. The fantasy would likely follow him until his murder spree, where he would follow those thoughts, tragically using them during the murders towards the young girls. Overall, the childhood of Tsutomu Miyazaki had a sense of pressure along with growing hate, similar to the other serial killers' childhoods. Personal life, potentially affecting their crimes and acts. The isolation did not change even when he grew to an adult. In fact, it was noted the isolation from others would worsen as he aged into an adult in society. As an adult, Tsutomu Miyazaki would live at his parents' house, tragically sharing a room with his older sister who reportedly he did not get along well with. Job-wise, he worked in a low-paying job as a photo technician and a copy editor, in other words, to work with editing images and processing them properly. During his early adult life, it was reported he felt heavily suicidal and felt like he did not have a purpose on living his life. In addition, when his grandfather passed away, Tsutomu would reportedly consume his ashes just to feel like his grandfather is still with him. Reportedly, Tsutomu Miyazaki would spy on his sister when she would shower, but when caught, Tsutomu would lunge at her and violently and sexually assaulted her. Overall, the unstableness of Tsutomu Miyazaki's life did not change from his childhood. In fact, as said before, it gotten worse. Pivotal events. Tsutomu Miyazaki was born on the 21st of August 1962 in Itsukaichi, Tokyo, Japan. From the year of 1966 to the year of 1980, Tsutomu was severely bullied and isolated from social life as a child. On May of 1988, his grandfather would tragically pass away. On the summer of 1988, Tsutomu Miyazaki would consume his grandfather's ashes. On July 1988, Tsutomu Miyazaki would spy on his sister while she showered. On July 23, 1989, Tsutomu Miyazaki was arrested. On August of 1989, the police raided the house of Tsutomu Miyazaki. On April 17, 1999, Tsutomu Miyazaki was sentenced to death by hanging. Quotes from Tsutomu Miyazaki. まだ目が覚めてない夢の中で、それをやったように感じる。首吊りによる死刑執行は怖くて残酷だから、薬物注射に変えるべきだ。おじいさんが死んだとき、私は壊れてしまった。壊れてしまったんだ。私は殺人について無罪だ。ネズミ男に取り憑かれていたんだ。ネズミ男は奇妙な生き物の、あるいはある種の暗い生き物のようだった。Forensic inferences. Tsutomu Miyazaki. As said before, he seems to have a dark arousal that stuck with him throughout his life. That would tragically stick with him during his killings and murders, leading to him using those fantasies during his murders. A combination of his childhood, social life, and potentially the death of his grandfather had likely affected both his mentality and his killings. Tsutomu likely builded both a hate and fantasies towards females during his childhood. He was heavily isolated, ashamed because of his body and medical conditions. That likely builded a hate within him towards females. Similar also to the case of Thor Nis Christensen. The reason likely why he chose to target little girls is because he may have felt a desire of control and dominance towards girls. A grown man can easily control little girls, intimidate little girls, which he likely used that advantage as well during the murders. For the case of his cannibalism, he likely learned, especially from consuming his grandfather, it was not the direct cause of his murders. However, it contributed to the ritualistic behavior he would demonstrate throughout his killings. Throughout his life, he did not feel a sense of victory despite the genuineness whenever with his grandfather. However, that relationship, the connection he would have with his grandfather would shatter the moment his grandfather passed away. It was highly likely difficult for him, due to the fact deep down he likely wanted to feel a sense of genuineness. Overall, the crimes and murders for the case of Tsutomu Miyazaki was driven by severe loneliness, along with isolation and dark fantasies towards females. Legacy and impact. The case of Tsutomu Miyazaki had changed the term of otaku in Japanese culture. Tsutomu's case was one of the largest serial killer cases in Japan. Japan began to tighten the laws for the distribution of child pornography. Mangas for the case of Tsutomu Miyazaki began to be created and produced. Parents in Japan began to worry about letting their children walk out alone in the streets. Complications regarding the debate of legally sane or insane began to arise in Japan's court. Till this day, parents in Japan still worry whether if their child will come back safe home or not.